Here is about as simple of a snack stick recipe as I can come up with. It only has 3 ingredients. Now, there's a little bit to the technique to get it through a small tube, but for a base recipe, it's salt cure, Worcestershire sauce, and concentrated liquid smoke. Now, I'm going to give you a variation right off the start, that I'm going to use some paprika for color, again purely optional. I'm going to use some crushed red pepper for heat, again purely optional, and some binder, again purely optional if you use a meat like this 80/20 ground chuck that's got some fat to it. Now, if you're using deer, you might want to add the binder just to make sure that your sausage holds its form and shape. Now, because this is a sausage with quite a bit of moisture in it, at the end of the cook, you will notice the sausage is a little wet, and that's the purpose of dehydration. We're going to cook it first, get it to 165 degrees for the 10 minutes to make sure that we've killed off anything that might be in there. You know, hamburger's bad about developing E. coli and things like that. It's aerobic bacteria, and there's a lot of surface area for the bacteria to grow on in a ground product, and especially if it's not ground fresh in front of you and then immediately frozen. So we're going to cook it first, and then we're going to end up with some excess moisture that we're going to dehydrate to improve presentation. Now there's your recipe, your basic recipe. There's Worcestershire sauce and the concentrated liquid smoke and salt. Over here we find 3 optional ingredients. We have crushed red pepper, paprika, and the binder. Now this part is very hard. You add the salt, add the pepper, add the paprika, add the binder, and stir. Next, we're going to give it one last little swirl, and then we're going to pour. We'll mix by hand. Now I'm going to try to use this little bitty tube so I can use a very long length of casing. So I'm going to try to heat this up a little bit to aid extrusion, because remember, on my little unit I have the nylon gears, which are not real stout. So to get it to go through this little tube, it's been polished as smooth and shiny as it can be on the inside. We're going to warm this up in the microwave. We're going to essentially put it in here on a low power, probably about 2, and a cook time, let's start with let's do 8 minutes. Now we're going to end up putting it in the oven, and we're going to cook it for 1 hour at 300 degrees. That's going to get us to our 165 degree temperature. Now I showed you warming in the microwave. You may also warm in the conventional oven. Take a stainless steel bowl and shape your batter around in a thin little, see, this is maybe ½ inch, 3/4 inch, so that you expose as much as you possibly can to the heat of the oven and the heat to the bowl, and that way it'll help keep from having cold spots and hot spots. And then take it out, rework it, put it back in, and that should help warm it up. Now, why are we cooking this? Well, we want to activate the cure, and we want to make sure anything in our meat is killed off at 165 degrees for 10 minutes. And then any remaining moisture, because this is a reasonably wet mix, we're going to dehydrate over here. Now if we dehydrate enough, then it'll actually be dried out enough that it'll actually be shelf stable. That is, if we dry it enough, because here we're making a cooked product, here we're making a dehydrated product. Using both will make your product last a lot longer. Most snack sticks that you buy off the shelf are shelf stable. They don't require refrigeration. Here's a typical one. Beef, salt. That's pretty basic ingredients. I think we can figure what they're used for. Corn syrup solids. That, I'm betting, is their binder. Water, spices, flavorings, monosodium glutamate. I'm thinking that's probably added for taste. Dextrose could be added for taste, but it could also be used in conjunction with the sodium etherobate and lactic acid starter culture. Now what they're added for is to produce the fermentation to drop the pH so that they are shelf stable. Now sodium etherobate not only modifies the environment just a little bit for the lactic acid starter culture, but it also helps enhance the color. Sodium nitrite. Now that is the active ingredient in #1 cure and half of the active ingredient in Morton Tender Quick. So everything's there, has got a purpose. Now do you see how much smaller this tube is than the casing? Now the casing is very small itself, and what it's going to do is, by being virtually using this metal one rather than my plastic one, I can only feed so many feet at a time on this thing. This way I get quite a bit more, and I'm actually able to extrude in a much larger string before I have to come back and tie off the end. Okay, to tie or not to tie, you can do these little links just like you can link sausage and flip them back and forth clockwise and counterclockwise each time, and that'll work. That kind of stresses the casing. It's just as easy to extrude the long casing and just tie them off like this, especially if you're going to handle them twice like we are, where we're going to cook them first and then dehydrate the rest. It's just as easy to cut you a few strings and tie them off. There's the first, I'd say about 2 pounds, by looking at the how far the stuffer went down. I'm not going to have quite enough of that piece of casing left to get another 2 pounds, so I'm going to start a fresh one and probably do exactly the same thing as I did here. Now in that string, that represents the remainder of the sausage. The unit is at the bottom of the stroke. There's no more going to come out of that can. I got a little bit residual in the tube, but you're not going to be able to cook that. So we've got some in the oven. Pretty soon we'll put this in there and we'll take the other out and start dehydration. Break your unit completely down. Take the piston apart, take the silicone ring out, gently removing it, cleaning it completely. Clean the air valve, the nut, any tools you would use in the process. Make sure your bung nut there is cleaned on the inside with a brush. Clean the threads on your tank. Clean everything in hot, soapy dishwater. Now we got a tray, the first tray. We got the overage on that one. We're going to put the two together. Stack them on this just residential style dehydrator. Turn the unit on and they'll get a head start. I've loaded up the second loop, and you see I've split it into 2 separate rings because you want to allow enough room around your sausages to dehydrate properly. And we're going to stack these up and add them to the dehydrator. A note on dehydration. Now remember, we added cure to it, which was some salt, some sodium nitrate, sodium nitrite, and that adds some stability to your sausage and some color as well. But we had a pretty wet mix in order to get it extruded. So the dehydrator can be used at bare minimum just to tighten up your sausages and make them look presentable. It can also be used if you dry them completely out to the same dryness as you do jerky. They'll be shelf stable because there won't be enough moisture in them for anything to grow. Okay, they're as dry as I'm going to make them.